Welcome, David Williams.
Hello. Hello, and thanks a lot for coming. Much appreciated. I'll be quite upfront with you though. A couple of weeks ago I was invited to give a talk about my work and related things to, of all places, the University of Edinburgh Catholic Chaplaincy. Following which I decided that I would quite significantly change that presentation for today's purposes. If you want to make God laugh, show him your plans, somebody once said. And I've actually been laid up with a bug ever since. And taken a while to recover. This getting old lark, my advice to the youngsters out there is just don't do it. And so I've been toiling a wee bit. I'm on the mend. But I haven't had the energy really, not so much the time, the energy, to alter the talk significantly. So the options were to cancel, which I'm very glad I didn't, because I got a jacket from my friend from Norway today, and or to more or less go on with that chaplaincy thing. Anyway, I thought better of it, and why not try it anyway? It's certainly worth a pop, and it might come across as a bit quirky in this context, but nothing wrong with a bit of quirk now and again, and maybe even more interesting for it. Anyway, so where it's fallen. So what follows is a slightly edited version of that recent talk. Before launching into the verbal side of things, with accompanying stills, I'd like to start by showing just a small piece, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, an image dissolve piece I made not so long ago, essentially as a farewell gift to my son before he left us for university. Something I didn't show at the chaplaincy actually, but it's very simple. It's called For Samuel, and I've just scribbled something down here this afternoon. It reminded me of someone called Tony Harrison, a fantastic poet, and I remember reading something by him where he was saying the guilt he felt at not being able to produce work that his father could understand. It's a very emotional piece of writing because he's classically trained, this, that, the next thing. This is For Samuel. It's the world premiere, actually. And it's in very basic form here. It's just in PowerPoint form. If it gets finished, we'll do it on some kind of movie format. But you'll get the idea pretty quickly. It's 4 minutes, 5 minutes. So, that was that. See if I can get out of this. Right, so I'll just...
Okay.
I think so, yes, fine. Yeah.
Just keep
I might just have to
that
juggle
okay?
things around as I'm showing things. We'll see how we get on as we proceed. So, as I say, I mean, simplicity itself. And the title's important. It is for him. Mind you, he's got a brain the size of a planet these days, but it's willfully simple almost. And sometimes it should be, shouldn't it? You know, we're playing the same old tune maybe all the time, but sometimes it's just got to be as simple as possible, I think. And hopefully it's relevant to what's to follow. And you might even decide to reflect on it a bit more after having heard what's to come. This might sound a bit ominous, but I don't think I've given a talk quite so kaleidoscopic before, apart from the chaplaincy version, of course, but it's a bit of a plate spinner, actually. This reference will be beyond 90% of the audience here today, but for those who can remember, it's a wee bit like maybe one of those Ronnie Corbett from the Two Ronnies, do you remember him? Those monologues where he sat in that huge swivel-back chair, seemingly all over the place, the feeling that at any moment the whole thing could unravel, fall apart, but underpinning it all, a barely discernible thread holding things together. It's quite masterful, really. Now, let's see if we can go to this, if this is going to make any sense. That's the overarching title of this presentation. So, I want to do this. Thank you. Keep me right, Sophie. Keep me right. So yeah, Ronnie Corbett, indeed. And knowing my luck, this shaggy dog lecture could, in fact, simply fall apart. We'll see. But you might get a laugh here and there. It looks like I'm going to be meandering here and there, for which I beg your indulgence. But hopefully in the round, on my part, there is a kind of method here. And it will make some kind of sense. If it doesn't, at least you might see some images which might take your fancy for whatever reason. If not, there'll be another bus along next week, I would imagine. But let's meander for several minutes, quite a few actually, by way of laying out some territory. It's just the way it evolved for me, really. When I was putting this together, it was as though I was talking to myself in a way. I mean that. Trying to work things through for myself, thinking aloud. And I chose to go with that. In some respects, I'm showing you my dirty laundry here. What's behind my stage curtain, as it were. The workings. Or it's as though, for better or worse, for some reason can't quite fathom, I've decided to show you some of the 95% of the iceberg which is below the surface in my photographic practice. But of course it's very integral to the final above the waterline result. Students here today will already be aware, maybe more so than me, that the work one produces mysteriously stems from all kinds of sources, and not necessarily photographic ones. The literature one reads, music listened to, movies, relationships, and that's just as it should be. And that's the kind of hinterland of activity that will frame the talk. I've even left the business of juggling my initial thoughts and ideas as they appeared, that process, almost unedited, in the hope that when we come to look at images, lots of them, for the second half, so it's 30 minutes roughly, they'll resonate with what's gone before, without the nature of your response being hopefully prescribed too much by myself. Something like that. But as I say, it feels like a bit of a high wire act. Overall, much blowing my own trumpet. It's quite a rare thing for me, and not without its problems these days. And I'll talk about that a wee bit too. So, and maybe a wee bit eccentric. As I say, it just came out that way, and that's how it's more or less been left. It's quite stream of consciousness-y. The format, to begin with, lots of words, quotes, pithy, scattergun referencing on all manner of things, bon mot, and doubtless all manner of contradictions, which I'm increasingly keen on, for reasons that might be clear. For those not so fond of words, I apologise in advance, but can assure you that once we get going, we'll be hurtling through images at a near animation pace towards the end. And it's new for me to do things in this way. And what I'm about to present is a far from comprehensive overview of my work. In the cause of being somehow thematic, I've decided to select work based to varying degrees on my ongoing interest in something called non-duality. Ouch. It's a fairly ghastly word, actually. And by definition, ultimately indefinable. inconveniently enough. But that's at the heart of why preparing this presentation proved so challenging for me. And I'm not complaining, it was my choice to do that, but it did stretch me a bit. And I should emphasise that in order to connect with the work, I hope there's absolutely no need whatsoever for people to know the slightest thing about non-duality. Perhaps it will become clearer what non-duality might be about as we proceed. And of course some here may be well ahead of me when it comes to knowledge of such things. Although I'm keen to avoid strict definitions, the following is a user-friendly and fluid enough one to maybe be of some use. It's from someone called Richard Sylvester. And it doesn't close matters down too much. It's as follows. Non-duality is simply a word that attempts to describe the reality that there is only oneness arising as everything and that there is no separation. Well, that's all pretty straightforward then. Hibs 3, St Mirren 2. For the moment, let's call it oneness, or even better, maybe more enigmatically, but more accurately, not two-ness. And I want to avoid giving the impression that I make work slavishly adhering to some concept or other. Fundamentally, I just adore making photographs. Obsessively, to be honest. And that's not something I'm particularly proud of, obsession, at all. Anyway, it surprises me how many of the images are underpinned by this non-dual thing, one way or another, without necessarily being about it. As I say, this is far from a comprehensive overview. Depending on your taste, some of you might engage better with less project-based work I've done. So much of it not included here today. Commissions, portraits, self-portraits, commercial work even. One-off pictures of family and friends. I've got a couple of these here. Some of it very removed from notions of non-duality, but then again, some of it not. Anyway, if you're interested in having a peek at that, a wider range of work, I'll provide my website address later. So let's start with a kind of health warning. I'm retired from lecturing now. We'll let this gentleman come in. You got a seat?
Beg your pardon.
You're fine, don't worry. You maybe have to sit at the front there if that's all right. Is that okay?
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm retired from lecturing now, but if I were to start lecturing career all over again, in retrospect, particularly when delivering on my own work, I might be tempted to show this quote before any presentation, actually. I think the most important part being the last two lines, where some have found their paradise, others just come to harm. I've naively disappeared down a range of rabbit holes following all manner of phony gurus over the years, but Joni Mitchell has never let me down once. The secular priestess of her generation. God bless her and all who sail in her. And I certainly was one of those, and still am actually. So according to Joni then, huge pincers of salt all round in situations like this would seem to be the sensible order of the day. I'm about to try to tell you where I've gone, but hopefully, definitely not, where to go. Where have I gone? What's my territory artistically? On a day-to-day basis, I'm probably as caught up in and moved by politics, current affairs, world events as most folk are. Maybe even more so. But as an artist, so-called, as an artist, to respond to such matters is not really what drives me. At least not overtly, and it never has. So many ways to skin that creative cat. That's what I've written here. And I think all should be celebrated. From Paul Clay's I paint in order not to cry, through to more overtly socially engaged practice, and combinations of everything in between. I have a little concern on the side that these days... No, I'm not going to say that. Anyway, for me, a wee bit perversely perhaps, sometimes, one of my concerns as an artist is probably less to do with what things are happening in the world and more to do with that things are happening at all. Oh dear, what's all that about? As you're about to discover, I'm certainly not a trained philosopher, nor a person of great intellect in any accepted sense, for which I make few apologies these days. I used to, but not anymore. I don't know about you, but there are times I wish I had no intellect at all. And after this presentation, you might conclude my wish has already been granted, and more. The intellect's so useless for so many things. It's such an overrated thing. It's good for hanging doors and making spaghetti and stuff like that, but going to the moon, but beyond that. So, just occasionally, maybe due to decades spent in academia, which was, this is one for you, Sophie, which has actually been very good to me in many, many ways, and what an honour to be so signally involved in the progress of so many young lives, some of them here today. Just fantastic. Nevertheless, in relation to certain aspects of academia and beyond, I do occasionally find myself sympathising with a comment by someone called Nisargadatta. He's a great Indian guru, he died quite recently, relatively recently. And he said, the most difficult are the intellectuals. They talk a lot, but are not serious. And I think that's just wonderful. And I have to be careful. It's a cheap shot, and it's a bit facetious, but and slightly out of context as well. But I think we know in particular situations what is meant by this. Anyway, my background, briefly, is quite simple. Apart from gaining a wee degree in English and sociology, and it was a wee one, which is very unusual for someone like me in those days. My background was very working class. And was. Ultimately, post-university was pop music, writing and performing pop music. Sophie had me down as a composer, which I mean, a bit over the top, but there we are. I was a pop songwriter, really. That was my job for a few years, prior to falling head over heels in love with the medium of photography. And that's going back some way, of course. But even in that music context, I was intuitively drawn to what I suppose might be termed an ontological or metaphysical approach to things. Being, being and all that stuff, which can be wonderfully disguised in the smoke and mirrors of the humble pop song. I mean, but again, hopefully not a slave to concept, just intuitively somehow, and definitely not to the exclusion of all else. I'm as fond of Gerry and the Pacemakers as the next person. And I've written here, that's the wrong example, You'll Never Walk Alone is about as ontological as things get. That's a little pause for a laugh. So I suppose it's possible this presentation might be seen to function within some kind of spiritual parameters. But what on earth might that mean? It occurs that if this was taking place somewhere in America, there might be more than reasonable possibility of at least one member of the audience carrying a firearm, resulting in there being much more chance of a response to the following plea actually being carried out. Namely, if the tone of my talk comes across as remotely proselytizing, just take me outside and shoot me. It's nothing could be further from what I want to convey here. If anything, Van Morrison might be the role model in this respect, with his no guru, no method, no teacher. And consequently, I would add, no soapbox whatsoever. I might have certain preferences in that area, but that's not relevant for today. Since my retirement, there's been an exponentially growing affinity with such pithy observations as silence is God's first language. That's from St. John of the Cross. More prosaically, but basically alluding to the very same thing, there's a very irascible guy called U.G. Krishnamurti. Some of you may have heard of him. He's not that long dead. Indian guy. He was a kind of spiritual teacher of an extremely eccentric kind. Extremely eccentric. You'd go there at your peril, actually. But his advice, again and again, he would just bark at his hangers-on. Your job in life is to shut up. Which I think is just wonderful, actually. Then there's Wittgenstein. About that of which we cannot speak, we must remain silent. And best of all for me, it's just so beautifully succinct, just discovered this a few days ago, Mark Rothko, silence is so accurate. Silence is so accurate. I just want to keel over when I hear that. It's so beautiful. Anyway, despite increasingly connecting with that kind of stuff and more, here I am again, thanks to Sophie's kind invitation, trying to nail my particular jelly to the wall, to talk about aspects of my work and what it might say, or even, heaven forbid, mean. Although some of it's very straightforward, at least on the surface, some of it maybe less so. Certainly one couldn't get simpler than that opening Samuel piece. Although just a wee peek behind the curtain, under the hood, if I can just, what I'm going to do, I'm going to close this one. Let me do that. Might need your help. I'm just going to dig into the Samuel thing again. and show some quite obvious things here. And one would be, for example, excuse me, I'm not even going to open this up because that's how it looks. But you know, you've got Samuel on a tree. I thought that place looked like the Garden of Eden actually when we were there. I mean, it's in Yellow Craigs. It's an extraordinary place. Do you know those trees? Does anybody know them? And he was eating this apple and he just bent over, and it was just like he'd eaten an apple, and somebody up there was not very happy with him. That's how photography can work. It's amazing. Most people can't read photography in that way. Students are here to learn that stuff. But you know, it's a language, it's very frustrating sometimes being a photographer. I'm not saying this is a great picture. I think it's a good picture actually. But most people won't see beyond the fact that it's a photograph. They just won't. And these are trained fine art historians, everything. And I found it a deep source of frustration. Go to America, it's different actually. The language is more advanced, I would say, or the awareness of it. So you move from that to, excuse me, you've got the red up, you've got the wound on the red wound on his knee. So to me it was like the fall, you know, the Garden of Eden, the fall, you move to this. I won't go on too much about that, and we'll just carry on. Some very obvious things I'm sure you noticed. For example, an open computer becomes Samuel's diary blowing in the wind, becomes his arm coming into the water. This is how it morphs together and advances. And then at the end, of course, you have the two opposites kind of staring each other in the face. The resolution, this kind of oneness thing, sums up the whole thing. It's the first time we see his face, apart from as a youngster in the bath. First time we see his whole face. There's a gnarled tree to the left-hand side there, symbolising what gnarled trees do, age, and in the background there are children playing in sunlight. Boom, close it. Now, I'm preaching to the converted here, but that's the kind of language in photography that I work with. It may not be your kind of thing, and many people don't get it. That's life, I suppose. So close this, come back to this, and we'll hurtle on. How am I doing? All right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do the wine glass. So, as a songwriter, I enjoyed moving between genres. Bits of pop-inspired things, rock, blues, country, some pieces melodic, some rhythmic. The Beatles, who I worked for, actually, believe it or not, I worked for Ringo Starr. He's a Beatle. He's still a Beatle. Mm-hmm. At one point. They were probably the role models. And what a phenomenal range they had. Amazing. And as a photographer or lens-based artist, I at least aspire to be much the same. More or less conceptual, simple or obscure, sometimes narrative-based, representational, sometimes erring towards abstraction. Photography can't be abstract, of course. Extended typologies, large-scale installations, one-off pieces of all kinds, moving image, all manner of cameras used. It sounds like a right old jumbo sale reeled off like that, but there we are. But the meaning of the work, meaning. For some, meaning's almost a forbidden word in the context of contemporary art practice. Some of you may have noticed this or not. And maybe for good reason. The thorny problem of meaning in art, or meaning in anything for that matter, sometimes it's best left alone. Although I occasionally think recourse to silence on behalf of some artists when it comes to the topic of meaning in their work is a bit ungenerous. As artists, why not at least try to address meaning in what we do as practitioners? Okay, maybe not meaning as such. Let's settle for possible meanings. The best art being multi-layered in content. And of course, ultimately unfathomable. We know that. But in the cause of acknowledging the bafflement of an all too often and rightly cynical public, let's playfully kick potential meanings around until we run out of words. Which, if the art in question is worth its salt, we will. Then the work will speak for itself. Even as willfully enigmatic an artist as John Cage was not averse to giving us a leg up when it came to helping us engage with his work. So, Newfound leisure time for me in retirement has given me the dubious luxury of having more opportunity to reflect on several decades' worth of the photographic output. Some age-old concerns of mine looming even larger, not the least of which is the very simple question, why are we driven to make art at all? It's always bugged me that. And whereas one doesn't want to spoil such a wonderful mystery as creativity by over-analysis, it's been rewarding and frustrating in equal measure to mull it over in my increased spare time, as well as continuing to churn out mountains of new work, more than ever actually, regardless of what's going to happen with it, to no particular end. Overall though, I would say that paradoxically as I advance in years, I'm even less sure of myself, my opinions in general, and in particular those about the work I make. At its simplest, there's an increasing sense of who am I to pronounce on anything. And believe me, I'm not being falsely modest here, there's something else going on. And apart from anything else, if I'm honest, my life's an omnishambles of uncertainty. Isn't yours? Maybe not. It's difficult to explain, but somehow it just feels increasingly inappropriate. This will probably be my last talk, I think. And if I'm honest, I really don't know. I don't really know. That's my dirty secret, laid bare. It's as though a kind of warning needs to be attached to every pronouncement, an increasing sense of just two words needing to be appended to each and every comment, opinion, observation, or piece of work for that matter. And those two words are or not. Or not. We'll try that as we proceed. And there's been an evolving awareness perhaps of the profound implication of Bob Dylan, probably the definitive secular priest of my generation. Weren't we so lucky to be raised with people like that? Those of us who were. It was phenomenal being with that stuff as it was coming through. Anyway, Bob Dylan, his reference to lies that life is black and white in his masterful composition, My Back Pages, with its refrain, but I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. And maybe does us no harm as pontificators and artists to dwell on that Zen koan-like pronouncement. And due to having more time on my hands and a lot of back pages to reflect on, I've been doing quite a bit of that. And then there's James Taylor, another kind of throwaway line, but somehow all the more powerful for it. I used to know why, now I don't know why no more. It's from a song called Raised Up Family, which I couldn't recommend enough. So as you can tell already, I'm a man for a pithy quote, and maybe as an ex-songwriter, I'm particularly drawn to popular music in this respect. I don't think it's an overstatement to suggest that by any definition, popular music was by far the most potent art form of the last century. And I mean by far. Or not. See how it gets you off the hook? You can be as ridiculously opinionated as you want. Just stick or not. It's such a neat antidote to that black and white view that Dylan's referring to there. Or not. After you're pontificating, and in one bound, you're off the hook. You can say anything what you want about anything and everything. And I borrowed that strategy from Richard Sylvester, I think. Anyway, this century, the jury is still out regarding the potency of popular music. And I'm no longer remotely qualified to pass comment these days. But some of those songwriters from the last century, it's as profound as it gets. And you can whistle along and tap your toes to it into the bargain. What a glorious art form. Now, I'm digressing a bit, but hopefully it's at least tangentially relevant to what's coming up, and that such references ultimately relate to the actual content of at least some of my photographic work. That uncertainty business. Kind of what aspects of the work might be about somehow. And I'm sometimes even inspired by the actual form that music can take. For example, seriality in what I do visually, using photographic typology, and most people here today will know what that is, as an equivalent strategy to that in serial music, with its potentially endless repetition typology, and all that implies massive implications in endless repetition. Massive. Some examples to follow. Anyway, over the years there's been a move on my part towards something less certain, well-defined, neutral, unknowing. The cloud of unknowing I announced to the chaplaincy, of course, I've got in here in brackets. If God exists, he's grey. That was the German painter Gerrard Richter, I hope, said, echoing that anti-black and white quote of Dylan's. Here come in. If God exists, he's grey. So there's more on grey to follow as well. So we'll shortly be having a look at my particular humble efforts at trying to get home, my work. As per the title of this talk, Trying to Get Home, it sounds very grand, melodramatic, but time for another health warming, I think. And this from Woody Allen. Great stuff. And so true. But it shouldn't prevent us having a bit of fun kicking certain, essentially unspeakable things around. Something Woody Allen himself is particularly adept at. Apparently very serious, yet maybe not to be taken seriously at all. A really difficult line to tread. Here's Joni again. Each being us, so deep and superficial, human beings, between the forceps and the stone. Jaw-dropping lyrical talent for me. Jaw-dropping. It's great to see her being written about now as the Beethoven of last century. She deserves it. I think she's way beyond that, actually, but there we are. And I'm sad to see she's unwell. She flew too close to the sun, that's what happens. Anyways, much more on opposites to come. This whole thing's about opposites, really. And let's have them both. The deepness, the superficiality, play them off against each other. And it's certainly what the very greatest artists, if you're old-fashioned enough, like me, to believe in such beings, you're not really allowed to talk about great artists these days. I can, I'm an old man now. But in our college, it's kind of, no, we don't have great, individuals. We're kind of, arts evolved beyond that. Bollocks. So anyway, let's review. So far, so very back of the fag packet philosophy from me. But that's never stopped me in the past, and I'm in quite elevated company as regard wrestling with what might motivate us to make art in the first place. This is from a letter by Ian Hamilton Finlay on Kazimir Malevich, whose work, in its void-like minimalism, was to change contemporary art forever. It's quite long, but you'll get it, I'm sure. Quicker than me, probably. And we'll be moving to pictures soon. So it's a return to some state. We were talking about Eden earlier on. That's, a drive. That's why you make things. This is Malevich's notion. He was the first guy to produce a black canvas, and a white one, I think, actually. Doubly interesting. This is being approved of by Ian Hamilton Finlay. Not someone you'd pigeonhole as the most spiritual of artists in the conventional sense, but then again, what is spirituality? It's such an overused, misused word. Depending on one's perspective, Finlay could be considered one of the most spiritual artists around, actually. Or not. So, trying to get home via art. In fact, I think it's more than reasonable to propose that, and here we go, just about everything we do as sentient beings is one way or another driven by this desire. So much so that I wrote a song about it. Here's the first verse. There's no time to unpack such shamelessly universal claims here, though again, I think it's of at least tangential relevance to aspects of my photographic work. And in a way, I'm kind of leaving you to join up the dots as we proceed. But don't get the idea that via these lyrics in the Malevich quote, I'm advocating some kind of woolly art as transcendence thing. I don't feel that's necessarily what they point to at all. In fact, transcendence and immanence, this, might even turn out to be the same thing. In which respect, there's a sucker punch at the end of this song. You might want to track it down. It's on YouTube, which kind of deals with that. Photography is great at dealing with these opposites that I'm so taken with. Immanence, transcendence. It's real and unreal. It happened and it didn't. What more do you want? But that's what people don't understand when they look at photographs. You do. So I say more on the opposites and the reconciliation to come. So I've chosen bits and bobs from down the years which loosely inhabit the context of what I've been trying to say up until now. In this context, it might be appropriate that I start with something quite obscure but quite recent perhaps my own humble photographic version of Malevich's minimalism, his allusion to void. It certainly feels as though I couldn't produce anything more irreducible in terms of what I wanted to say. I thought I was going to stop taking pictures once I'd done this. But Malevich got back to doing representational canvases. And that's it. I'm going to move on quite quickly from this, but just what do we have here? An equal sign. Almost an equal sign. That's important. I'm not sure why, but I know it's important. That the heads of those matches are not, I know it's just right. Equal sign made of matches, pun, of course, in English, match. Live matches, what happens if you light them? They burn, you're left with a grey void. Floating, hovering, in a perfect mid-tone neutral grey. Believe me, it's perfect. It might not be, but one measures all these things. And maybe some kind of underlying equanimity being alluded to here. The fact that things are just as they are, maybe, enough. And contemporary science could be seen to point to more or less the same thing. That fascinating post-quantum, infinitely interconnected worldview. Things essentially equal in their makeup. Being just as they are. E equals mc squared. Energy is mass. It's very reminiscent of Zen Buddhism's form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Although I should say here that I'm the first to cringe at some of the dodgy Bluffer's Book of Science material that's often called upon to justify certain spiritual perspectives. It can be the very last refuge of the scoundrel. Might be what I'm doing, actually. Nevertheless, it should come as no surprise to us, perhaps, that there seem to be many intriguing parallels between science and spirituality, however one defines it. And that more than occasionally, they seem to dovetail in and out of each other in sensibility. And I think this is worth noting in certain contexts. And if nothing else, it breaks the ice at cocktail parties. And we'll be returning to this apparent opposite things equals later, soon. Very tricky to talk about, but very important for me at least. And this image will appear again briefly and sporadically, almost at random, as we progress, by way of a kind of reminder, if only for me, which might just look and feel daft actually, I'm not sure, we'll see. So in terms of that non-dual sensibility, that oneness, that equalness stuff, let's rewind 40 years and look at some things, perhaps a bit more obvious, at least superficially, but functioning in the same territory. Here's one, I don't know if this is my first roll of film or not, but it's pretty close to it. Botanical Gardens. I might have still been a musician then, actually. I certainly didn't know how to work the camera. I had a little light bulb and an exposure on my hand. I had a sun and a cloud. And and it came out, So, do you want to unpack this? You've got this container with an old man apparently sitting in it. We know he's not. This is pre-digital. He was sat on a seat further down, presumably staring a child in the face. They're both in the same container, heading the same way, presumably, same journey. Luckily enough, there's a statue of the Madonna and Child in there by Jacob Epstein. I knew the Botanical Gardens inside out. I used to sit there and cry my eyes out most days. So when I saw something like this is a wee bit of luck involved in this, as I remember. Anyway, so that's that. It's even as an aspiring amateur, the presentation, resolution, ultimate integration of opposites, apparent opposites, and somehow rendering them joined at the hip, in balance, mutually defining equals, reconciling them, integrating them, portraying them in such a way that they can be seen to cancel each other out, all informed my very primitive practice, albeit intuitively. Talk of philosophical notions of duality, non-duality, that only appeared after ploughing through all manner of literature and other things. In some ways, a sublime waste of time. Simply confirmed certain intuitive suspicions. And I'd been attempting to do it since I very first started making work. Namely, trying to get home, in Malevich's sense, via pointing to a kind of underlying oneness, often via the strategy of the reconciliation, the integration of opposites in my photographs, almost regardless of the surface content. metaphorically trying to turn black and white into grey. This is, a bit less obvious, but in this respect, but this happens to be my erstwhile songwriting collaborator with his grandfather. Goes back a long way. Just a picture of a guy playing the guitar with his granddad. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the context you present these things in. Just my luck to be hooked up with he was a genius, Neil. The only one I've ever known. It's a word I've never, ever trusted. It just seems like a nonsense word. This guy was a genius and it was a nightmare to work with. There's an energy there which would just scare the shit out of you, Anyway, that's him serenading his granddad. But can you have one without the other? This message is coming through. And let's move on. So, just a family snapshot, maybe. Clue might be in the title, Christmas Day. There's an energy charging through this grouping. Talk about unification of opposites. Its source being the somewhat baffled child. Christ, perhaps, innocently imbuing those two adults, aging stand-ins for Joseph and Mary, perhaps. My dad doubling as one of the kings. Imbuing them with a joyous energy, some kind of unifying circuit being established here. This picture was shown in the portrait. People like it. It's a funny picture. Nobody's really got it until Jim Lawson, his wife, phoned me, and I'm not being immodest, but this is just the case. She said, Jim wants to write about this picture. He's had an epiphany. He's a fabulous writer, Jim. And he wrote a 4-page piece on this photograph, and it's much, much better than the photograph, believe me. But my God, did he get it. I was so pleased. And I like that velvet, entertain, that's your job. But get it layered. Get it as layered as you can. Not easy. This could be similar. My son and his godfather. Just a picture of some kid and his godfather. Maybe, but here's two opposing, certainly in terms of life experience, anonymous, central characters. Doesn't matter who they are. Even better, we don't see their faces. Because then they become every man, every person. You know what I mean? Literally staring each other in the face. One held, physically held, connected, intimately, apparently separate. Apparently separate. That's an important word, apparent. But essentially inseparable. You just can't have one without the other. And so on. We'll lose the words. So it's quite an amusing picture, hopefully, but maybe the equivalent of one of those smoke and mirrors, deceptively simple, one-off pop songs I mentioned earlier. You can smuggle a hell of a lot of content via a simple toe-tapping snapshot. But then again, it's maybe just a picture of my kid and his godfather. So I'm getting ahead of myself a wee bit chronologically. I just want to make a few points about that interconnected opposites thing through some old pictures. Here's another one. There's not much to say about that. I mean, in the context of what I've been saying, it's very clear. Apart from the fact that I was inspired by somebody once said to me, "Oh, you've had a boy, you've had a child. Well, when you have a child, you die." And that's where this came from. This sneaked in, and I've just left it. This kind of oneness thing, I don't know how it got in there. It's a self-portrait. My website's full of such flotsam and jetsam all over the place. That's a 12-minute exposure in the middle of the night. In case you're interested, probably not. So from now on, moving on quickly, extracts from more or less chronologically sequenced project-based work will form the backbone of what we're looking at. As time progressed, it was both reassuring and a relief to go on to discover I wasn't making it up, inventing my own planet. Without going into too much detail, I found that many, many spiritual, that word again, texts, classical and contemporary, across religions, especially mystical, esoteric aspects of religions, are jam-packed with the notion of the reconciliation of apparent opposites. Some of you will be way ahead of me with this stuff. I should add that down the millennia, to varying degrees, the work of certain Western philosophers is not without at least some kind of non-dual flavour. Plato, through to David Hume, William James, Wittgenstein, to the more recent postmodern deconstructionist deliberations of the likes of Jacques Derrida. Now, I'm no expert, but it would seem to be the case. Anyway, my particular preference is for the lyrical pithiness manifest in some Eastern thinking. and pop songs, of course. So back to the reassuring mystical pronouncements on that reconciliation of opposites, lark. This one I've already referred to, but I like it so much, and I think it's so pivotal that, and it's the ultimate toe tapper. I don't think it's ever been beaten. You know, Einstein got there eventually. So these guys tended to be guys. This is a long, long time ago. It's peppered, completely peppered with stuff like this. And in the Taoist tradition, there are, I mean, in some ways this could be seen as a yin-yang frenzy today. This is a yin-yang fest. Maybe a wee bit more, I don't know. Anyway, such musings are not only to be found in what many regard as airy-fairy, mystical texts, and time for another trendy contemporary science reference, but it's a lovely, lovely piece of writing, I think. We talk about opposites in perfect alignment, a web of elemental yes-nos woven together. This is an article on computers. The digital age throws up so many amazing things for artists to deal with, conceptually. A world woven together of yes and no's. Beat that. Or enjoy it, for what it is, the kind of mystery of it. So moving swiftly on. This is a project I did in a girls' school, which was quite well known at the time. But the reason I've selected these images is within this theme that I've announced at the beginning, this non-dual thing. This project wasn't about non-duality, but an awful lot of it was driven by those concerns. We've got an older girl is about to leave the school, a young one who's just arrived. They're both the same. Really, that's it. But hopefully it's a nice thing to look at and a wee bit of a laugh and all the rest of it. As you look through the work, these juxtapositions all the way through, this is a juxtaposition in itself. These girls are already 40, as far as I'm concerned. I've got one frame. I mean, just in that, you can imagine, 11, however many. They were ripping the place apart. They were tearing down the lights and the curtains, and it was mayhem. And for me, it's such an achievement, They are now 40. Two of them contacted me last year to buy prints. One of them's a brain surgeon in Philadelphia. Amazing. I bet you can tell her instantly from this photograph, This one, my favourite photograph in the book. And it was the one that was to really propel me forward in my own terms anyway. The deal's over here. You've got a 3-year-old kid and the deal is over. She's off. Mums used to look at this and cry. I never really understood why, actually. Well, I did. But I just suddenly realised a white surface and a black line at a funny angle. You can do that in terms of meaning. Again, most people don't get it, but for me at least. So I then moved into a semi-abstraction. So the work, it's not about non-duality, the schoolgirls' work, but my work never is about non-duality. Increasingly underpinned and inspired by it, by its implications, but not about it. And that's an important distinction for me, and why you don't have to know a thing about it to engage with the work. As I said earlier, I'm just providing a peek behind the curtain, which I hope some people might find interesting. If it's not for you, hopefully you might connect with at least some of the forthcoming images. If not, rock and roll. But even way back then, I was at least partially driven by the desire, it seems, not to just document life in a private girls' school, but to chart the progression in its pupils from innocence to a certain self-aware maturity, a kind of fall, with all that implies. So to chart this process, that it comes across as one thing somehow. We see glimpses of the young pupils and the older, and vice versa, cross-referencing back and forth, trying to cheat time almost. But hey. So, chronologically, moving on, towards a form of abstraction inspired by this picture, that non-duality underpinning, kicking in more now. Much reading and reflection having been done. In this case, probably The Dark Night of the Soul and Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell moved from folk music to jazz almost overnight. And, I'm no Joni Mitchell. My God, she's from another universe. But that, yes, you can do that. And I wanted to move quickly. I took up photography quite late. So this is a body of work called Is, Can you think of a more neutral title than that? And off I went. This very strange story behind this work, really. It's dedicated to Glenn Gould, so I was listening to lots of music at the time. This is the kind of signal photograph. What do you have? Black, white, divided equally. You have a cruciform in the darkness. You have a snake in the light. They're connected. What the fuck's going on here? I don't know. But to me, I really thought I'd finished taking pictures when I took that. And I've been trying to take this picture every single day since I did that. Why? You go back to the Hamilton Finlay thing. But why bother? Because I can't improve on it. I can. Other people might. The matches were as close as I got, you know. But I mean, I throw that in there. It's not a mistake. I thought, well, why don't we just have that after it? I could see these on a wall next to each other quite happily. Here's another one from that. So this checks and balances, spring, light, darkness, blah, blah, blah. This work was ridiculed out of London. This is for the students. Just maybe some encouragement. Just do it, you know. I was a complete laughingstock. Almost. This was in the Photographer's Gallery in London. And the comments book, they phoned me up to say it's been the most severe, aggressive comments they'd ever had in the history of the gallery. I thought, what? You know, because, you know, no disrespect, Martin Parr was coming through and all that very kind of socially relevant stuff, apparently. And they said, you know, do you want us to remove the book? And I was quite upset. I said, no. I wish I'd kept it, actually. Anyway, that was it. Closed up shop. A year later, now I don't tell the story through immodesty. It's just to make the point. Here we are in very big, very, very big gallery in Germany. This is an installation photograph of the work. Now, next door was Andy Warhol, and above me was Joseph Beuys. Now, who was right? The London people or these? Well, nobody, actually. Just get on and do it. And it might come round. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I mean, I got my teeth kicked, truly, but my dear friend Bjorn here exhibited it in Norway, which was a lovely experience. And it surfaced again, and, you know, people liked it. But at the time, it was hurtful, actually. Right, moving on, very quickly now. Stillness and occurrence. So this is very knowing now, this whole non-duality, reconciling opposites. Stillness, occurrence. The implication here is that they're the same. It's lifted from a wee Buddhist text I was reading. These are quite large-scale prints. Not quite as big as that, but not far off. And I was going to retire on this. I was making so much money. And the negatives got trashed. It was a disaster. However, they've been repaired. But that kind of, it's like rock and roll, you know, when you get, I'm not even going to say whether I like this work or not. I just knew when I made it that I was going to be making lots and lots of money. And it was taken on by a gallery called the Ingleby Gallery, which is a lovely gallery, actually. And it started. My God, Pink Floyd, Elton John, you know, here we go, bye-bye Edinburgh College of Art. And as I say, if you want to make God laugh, show him your plans. So the negatives were severely damaged. And that was it finished. That rock and roll thing where you could, limited editions, C-type prints, gone. I can give them away now, and I do, because they've been repaired digitally, and it's great to be able to give these pictures. People love them, these pictures, which is nice. But I couldn't retire, unfortunately. You look at them now, you think, you know, these took me 5 years to make. Digitally, you could do this in 5 days now. But it is the North Sea, that's why it took 5 years. And there's 15 of them. So continuing chronologically, and on to Japan, where I've been working on and off for a few years now. Most of the work was undertaken at Buddhist temple sites. And how are we doing for time?
You've
10 minutes.
Right.
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
15.
15. Okay, right. I don't. Sorry, I've been blathering away actually, going off piste because some of this isn't making any sense to me. This isn't making any sense. So anyway, yes, I was nominated for the Kyoto Prize, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Japan, I should say. So the £500,000 would have come in handy, but guess what? I didn't win it. I didn't have a chance, but it was nice to be nominated. Japan. I have a dear friend here, Dave, spends a lot of time in Japan, and what a country. I mean, I get weepy just thinking about it, actually. So, it's been very, very good to me. So the Japanese worked tons of it, but here's some undertaken, mostly in Kyoto over the last 15 years, where, believe it or not, there's 2,000 temples in Kyoto. The overarching title of this project being, that. So one taste, apparently Buddhist masters used to sit in the village square and eat shit followed by cake. I don't know if it was human shit or animal shit. The point being, the essence of this is the same. It's that non-dual thing again. A bit like the Buddha with his flower or something. This is it. But it could be a lump of shit. So it's one taste, but it changes and never changes. This is the repetition thing. This is where Philip Glass, Steve Reich, this is where these people kick in. For me, that's what they're doing musically. It's a mantra. It's an oral mantra. This would be the equivalent, well, there's a more obvious example coming up, of visual mantra. This is a tree at a Zen temple, shot throughout the day. The centre shot is the picture. That's shot with a Hasselblad. On the right is taken from here to there. Oops, excuse me. On the left. So it's kind of playing around with time, and it's like, an echo of a moment, or this guy explains it well better than I could. So this goes on throughout the day. That's the temple wall, the sun coming through the canopy, as it were. And that's the last piece. These were quite big as well, actually. Moving on. And this is to do with this serial thing. I'm going to whiz you through these. And this. A bland aesthetic. He means things that look similar. Subject and object, meaning and unmeaning, interior, exterior, extant opposites, lark. These are just documentary pictures of these temples, these beautiful little temples that I spent 3 years photographing back and forward again. Just complete nutterdom, really. In order. I'm not going to show you them all. There's 88, but this is clinically executed with almost like a slide rule. Actually, the light's the same, the height of the tripod's the same, the distance of the prayer bell to the background is the same, and you just roll through them. I know every single one of these because it took hours to do each one, just as a still life. And it was on a mountainside. Just impossible to describe how I felt there. And they started to regard me as a pilgrim. They were feeding me, and it was very sweet, actually. And I did feel quite mad when I was doing it. I mean, halfway through, I thought, what's this? But the Ingleby Gallery sold them all, which was a source of great delight to me. I never saw them. So 88 framed pieces. It must look, I think, quite nice, probably, actually. But I've never seen them. They've gone off to, I'm almost ashamed to say, a bank in New York. But
did they take them down to London?
No. Ingleby took just about half a dozen of them. That was ages ago. But not the 88. I mean, the 88 have. They're quite small, these things.
Why 88, Dave?
Because it's to purify your 88 desires, and you become enlightened. You do the, so that's a visual mantra. That's the history of it anyway. That's the visual mantra thing. Moving on very quickly, we're near the end now. Flow. Those of you who've been to Kyoto, Bjorn, you'll recognise this.
Yes.
It's just, what is it like? I mean, oh God, I'm going to start crying. There's a tradition there, apparently it goes back hundreds of years, where couples, heterosexual couples still actually, I would say largely, they sit there and, courts may be too strong a word for it, but they just commune. At a respectable distance. You see the distance? The Japanese. So anyway, there's 72 of these. Don't ask why 72, because I've not a clue. It took me a long, long time to work out how to do this. Because of the weather, all kinds of stuff. I did a kind of morph thing, image dissolve of this. And it was nice to see the old people becoming the young people, and the young people becoming the old, and the males becoming the females. And it's clear what's going on here. This, I'm saying there's one thing happening. I mean, we know that. I don't need to say any more, do I? There's one thing happening. And my God, there's a river flowing by, for goodness sake. But hopefully, they're nice to look at. They're just nice to look at, if that's the way you want to take them. But hopefully, there's more than that going on. And as I say, I'm letting you see under my bonnet today. It may or may not be of interest. They're so tidy, and look, the paper bag, and the lovely polythene bag she's sitting on, and the way everything's organised, the shoes and the bags and the...
Did you ask him for permission or anything?
No, I didn't. I had a very... Of course, these days, that's quite a signal thing, you know. I don't feel bad about that, actually. They're anonymous to begin with. And I'm not saying that you're... We probably won't have time to discuss that, but yes, I mean, ethically, there's an issue here. I'm too old now to bother about it. No. Oh, no. No, listen, some people would throw me out the door for that.
No.
Absolutely. Oh, no, absolutely. I think about this. I think the spirit of these is a celebratory thing, and nobody's been made a fool of. Hopefully nobody's out with a woman or man that they don't normally go with. Blah, blah, blah. And now, we're nearly there. A piece which is underpinned by the notion of non-duality and its implications for free will. It stands to reason if there's only one thing being done, I mean, we're talking theoretically here, but nevertheless, there can't be a doer and a done. There can't be two things. The Buddha apparently said, actions there are, but no doer thereof. Or a bit less esoterically, but perhaps more interesting for some, is repeated in the findings of neuroscience, contemporary neuroscience. The notion that we're independent entities with free will and choice, coming under such serious scrutiny to an extent that these beliefs can be seen to inhabit the realm of the equivalent of some pre-Copernican world. We used to believe the sun revolved around the earth. So much contemporary art inhabits this territory. What are we? I mean, now more than ever. If through dramatic developments in science we've discovered we're not what we thought we were, just what are we? It's very threatening. Or not. Very liberating too. This is from Isaac Singer. And this is a work. It's called The Illusion of Agency. It's borrowed from a book. Agency here, in sociology, has another meaning. My wife's a sociologist. She wouldn't talk about agency. And it means free will. That somehow it's an illusion. In that matrix sense. You're plugged in. But you don't know it. You're kind of blissfully unaware. These are the size of your fingernail. I got them in the art college shop. They're for architectural models. To give a sense of scale. And these are my wee pals. I got to know them so well in their lives, you know. They're just leading their lives. But they're not aware that it's coming from up here, you know. And of course their pals are plopping off and new ones will grow. The gorgeous sculpture, they're literally that size. I just about died when I printed them. The detail is just extraordinary. And it's just a wee pocket camera because they don't have to be sharp. In fact, better not sharp. So that's the illusion of agency. And now we are finished. I'm going to whistle through these. My daily taking of pictures. And of course the diptych is the ideal format for this opposites thing, or making resonances. Some of these I've taken up in the Samuel thing. And they're to be dwelt on, just like little poems perhaps. That's it. I had an exercise. Somebody put some text to these once, but it didn't quite work out. To both our satisfactions, anyway. So it's the business, and I hope students, don't want to patronise you, but these days you can take pictures from morning till night. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I just love it. So I made a book of these, and of course there's a sequencing thing with one diptych will move to the next, and I've not actually done that here, I've just lifted them out. But you see something that catches your fancy, that's amazing, that's amazing. Photograph it, file it away, go back to it. And this is me now in Portobello. One thing about getting old is you get arthritis, which is good, because you need to walk it off every day. And I just walk, fighting arthritis, on the promenade, and I'm hoping to make a magazine, I don't know. So if you can imagine, this is just the very beginning of it. But I'm trying to pull it together into one thing. I've got all these disparate images. So the water will feature, obviously. So to imagine that's a spread. This thing here seems quite signal to me. It's a roundabout. Again, in that kind of metaphorical sense, it's a roundabout. And then these opposite pages, you've got this dreamy kind of boat. You've got, at night, the funfair. And this is my dirty laundry. This is nowhere remotely near finished. But I'm just playing around with things. This one I got out of my sick bed 2 days ago to do. Oh, sorry, no. You can see what's going on here. You've got the birds, you've got the guy with his headphones, he looks like the bird, the headphones ape the bird, blah, 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 blah. Fill it in for yourself, Single page, but again, there's nowhere near any kind of completion. But yes, he's just off for a day at the office. And then you would come back to this kind of wave, the sense being that this stuff is manifesting out of this totality. It might be shite. And then you keep coming back to this thing. And then these things that go on around it, This thing that's turning. The waves moving. Taking a bit of a liberty here. Om is, I think that says woe actually, but I've photographed it as Om, which is this kind of universal energy thing. And that night I nearly got completely washed away at Portobello. It was shocking. This doesn't work. But I'm playing around with it. So this guy to me looked like he was meditating, obviously. And then, there's a lost key. Someone's left a key on the little pillar there by the beach, and etc., etc. Well, that's me, trying to get home. No teacher, no guru, no method, maybe. But it might not come as a surprise in light of what I've shown and said that, if anything, I do have a particular fondness for the pithy sensibility of Zen. It's that serious fun thing again. It's a bit like Woody Allen with knobs on or knobs off. As I realised the last time I was saying and some of it 1,500 years earlier, of course. So I'd like to end by trying to put things into perspective. All that searching, deliberating, head-scratching, oneness, the self, the void, all, of course, very significant or not. It's just what I do between, as Joni says, the forceps and the stone. It's my hobby. Some people collect beer mats. Fine. This is a wee cracker, and this is. I'm going to read it out actually. The ultimate end of the koans might be seen in the following story, a bit of modern Zen humour, regarding a disciple who sent his master faithful accounts of his spiritual progress. In the first month, the student wrote, "I feel an expansion of consciousness and experience oneness with the universe." The master glanced at the note and threw it away. The following month, this is what the student had to say. "I finally discovered that the divine is present in all things." The master seemed disappointed. In his third letter, the disciple enthusiastically explained, "The mystery of the one and the many has been revealed to my wondering gaze." The master yawned. The next letter said, "No one is born, no one lives, and no one dies, for the self is not." The master threw up his hands in despair. After that, a month passed by, then 2, then 5, then a whole year. The master thought it was time to remind his disciple of his duty to keep him informed of his spiritual progress. The disciple wrote back, "I'm simply living my life, and as for spiritual practice, who cares?" When the master read that, he cried, "Thank God, he's got it at last." Thank you very much. Right, may have extended my welcome a bit there, so I didn't know it take so long.
I'm going to put lights on.
And thanks for your patience. I didn't know that was going to take so long, I'm sorry. Totally, Dave. Totally. Well spotted. Sorry, that sounds patronising. It was absolutely that. Dave's great photographer friend of mine here, he's just pointed out, we have to remember not everybody's 90 years old like us, but Cartier-Bresson, who you know, took a beautiful, it's one of my favourite pictures of his. It's called Déjeuner sur l'herbe, by the River Seine, isn't it? Is it? No, it's not the same. No, it's not. But it's by a river, and he's the perspective's the same. He's looking at this family, and the guy's pouring a bottle of wine.
Yes.
It was absolutely that. When I went to Kyoto for the first time, and I was working on all the other stuff. No, I mean the last 100 images. I mean, you're looking at images there that will probably never be shown or exhibited. My currency is not very. I've removed myself from the world these days in that respect. I think I agree with what you're saying, but by the same token, it raises other issues. I mean, a good picture is still a good picture, and it's still very, very difficult to produce. But I'm being selfish here, and I was really just showing you what it means to me on a daily basis there to be out on that promenade taking photographs and feeling, getting home. To go back to where we started.
The byproduct of your life.
Yeah, well, no, it's the main thing. It's how I get home. It's how I hit that void. If you want to be posh about it, you can talk about loss of self, and athletes talk about it, musicians talk about it. Why can't artists? That's why they do it. All the shit goes out the window. You don't have to worry. So digitally, and you don't have to stand in a dark room night and day. But listen, I love beautiful, those black and white pictures of mine. When I look at them, and you're right, when the cadmium was removed, I stopped printing. People like Bjorn carried on because he's a master technician. No, really, and Robin, they found a ways to deal with that. I couldn't get my head around it. I loved, didn't you? That paper. It was just, anyway, you can't get it anymore. Sorry, that's a bit of a long response, but you did ask.
How do you know when a project's finished?
That's a very good question, isn't it? Well, when you've got 88 things to photograph and you're finished.
Yeah.
So that was good. That I don't know. I sometimes work away and I think that I need one more image to conclude it, like the seascapes, the stillness and occurrence. There's 15 of those. Over 5 years, not the most prolific project I've ever done. But I knew it needed something to wind it up. I could go on endlessly, and it was the picture of, it happens to be my wife actually, pregnant in the water at the beginning. And once I had that, and there's one I didn't show you, but at the end, it's completely blue, deep, deep Rothko blue. And there's a lighthouse, a pin, it's the only sharp thing in the whole series. And once I had those bookends, for me it was finished. But it depends. Well, how do you know when a project's finished?
You don't.
You don't?
No.
Well, something.
That's different. That's different. When it's work for yourself, you never get paid for that. So I don't know.
I'm
I
talking.
don't-
I'm
yeah, I
talking
don't.
about work for yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I don't know when it's finished.
Yeah.
That's my problem.
But
Maybe
sometimes,
if it's made into a book.
yes. Sometimes you need to, I think, ask other people's opinions. I think
Yeah.
photographers need editors
Do you?
as much as writers. No.
Oh.
No, to be honest, I miss that now that I'm out of it. I mean, I miss a lot from teaching, the students really. But I miss that discourse that you could have over a cup of tea, or it's quite lonesome actually. I'm just a lonely, sad old git these days. Marauding the promenade.
It's not that.
Could you explore a little bit more your idea of non-duality and the, but yet in your photograph I still can feel the strong sense of balance and harmony,
Mm-hmm.
and I find that's quite not contradictory. It's such quite not suitable each other with the non-duality and the balance and harmony.
Well, I would see non-duality as precisely balance and harmony actually.
Okay. Yeah, that answer my question.
You know, or the opposites, you know. The problem with this non-duality stuff, and, you know, in a way, oh God, I'm craving the accuracy of silence here, actually, once you start talking about that stuff, because you end up in nowhere. I mean, the koan at the end there is really on the button, because you're saying there is no self. I mean, that's quite a major thing to take on. I can't. I mean, I'm just a wee boy. But it gets quite, and that's, I would come back to the Joni Mitchell thing, where some have found their paradise, others comes to harm. I'm not saying this is the way to view the world or anything like that, not remotely. But non-duality to me, I'm just interested, looking at my own past, how I was intuitively drawn to these things in music, through people like Bob Dylan. Is just, Bob Dylan could do a litany of opposites and resolve them. I was really, really drawn to that. Joni Mitchell, her last album, Shine. You listen to Shine, or not, but I think it's the best piece of music ever written in the whole planet, in the history of the whole universe, as Brian Cox would say. And it's just a litany of opposites with a light shining on all of it. She probably doesn't even know what non-duality is. It's you know, if there's any reality to it, it's going to appear everywhere, and it does. But beyond that, it becomes a bit abstruse and abstract, and, you know, I think just getting on with your life is about as non-dual as you can be. Because this, it would seem, we're reliably informed, and I trust these people, this is it. And photography, you look at William Eggleston, he deals with that. I just want to cry when I look at those pictures. You look at a cup of tea and you're seeing God. He would punch me if he was hearing me saying that. But, you know, he's that. But I sometimes feel nervous recommending these people as role models to students because they're all fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
Really. But they're pretty close. They're pretty damn close. You know. But maybe better just get a job in a shoe shop. Right, Sophie.
Can't end it there. Can we end it on that? Yeah, just get a job in a shoe shop.
No, I didn't mean that. And listen, I said at the beginning, this was aimed at the Catholic chaplaincy. That's what you've ended up with. So it's been a wee bit eccentric, but anyway, I hope there was something you could engage with there. So.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.